Mayor Gregory Langston, polished and practiced, wearing a smug smile as he denied every allegation brought against him. Bribery? Number displacement of low-income families? Misunderstood policies? Abuse of power? Absolutely not. And then they called the next witness, Andre Bell, 12 years old. Slim suit, nervous eyes, but a spine of steel. He stepped forward slowly. The room fell silent. Andre adjusted the mic, cleared his throat, and with one finger pointed, he said, "Mr. Mayor, you are the one who—" The courtroom gasped. This was not just a child. This was a witness. And what came next would change everything. This is the story of Andre Bell, a 12-year-old black boy who risked everything to speak the truth in front of those who thought they were untouchable. A mayor lied. A boy exposed him. The city trembled. Comment: truth has no age. If you're ready for the most unforgettable confrontation of the year. Because sometimes the smallest voice delivers the loudest justice. Andre Bell was not supposed to be at the center of the biggest political scandal in Birmingham's recent history. He was supposed to be studying for his science quiz, walking home from school with his backpack slung over one shoulder, and reading books about planets and rockets. But life in Block 9 rarely followed the script. Block 9 was one of Birmingham's oldest neighborhoods, a place full of the proud families, chipped bricks, and stories carved into every sidewalk crack. It was also a place the city had long forgotten, potholes unfilled, parks broken down, and trash pickups that never came on time. Andre lived with his grandmother in a small, two-bedroom apartment. She was tough, sharp-tongued, and the unofficial voice of the neighborhood. When something needs saying, she told him often, you don't wait for someone else to say it. You stand up. You speak out. Weeks before the courtroom chaos, the community center just 2 blocks from their home caught fire under suspicious circumstances. It had been scheduled for renovations, thanks to a petition signed by hundreds of Block 9 residents. Then came the whispers. Then the documents. A local journalist leaked city records that showed funds earmarked for the community center had been rerouted. The destination? A private golf course development near Mayor Gregory Langston's estate. Andre's grandma had been helping organize a case against the mayor. She had spoken at town halls, rallied local churches, and even prepped to testify at the hearing. But days before she was set to speak, she collapsed. A stroke. Hospitalized. Unable to attend. Andre sat beside her hospital bed, her frail fingers wrapped around his. "Don't let them silence Block 9, she whispered. That night, Andre called the community attorney. "If she can't speak, can I?" The lawyer hesitated. "She taught me how to speak the truth," Andre said. "So, now I will." He spent the night rereading every petition, every flyer, every handwritten note his grandmother had saved. He memorized her words, her tone, her fire. He practiced in front of the bathroom mirror at the hospital, adjusting his voice to carry not just his message, but hers. When the morning came, he dressed in the suit she had bought him last Christmas. It was a little big at the shoulders, the pants hemmed roughly by a neighbor with sewing skills and good intentions. But when he looked in the mirror, he did not see a boy. He saw a voice ready to be heard. Comment brain if you've ever had to step up when no one else could. Because Andre didn't just inherit her words. He carried them to the stand. The incident. "Mr. Mayor, you are the one who—" The courtroom was packed. Every seat was filled with reporters, city officials, and residents from Block 9. People whispered, exchanged glances, and scrolled through their phones, waiting for what was expected to be just another city corruption hearing. At the center of it all sat Mayor Gregory Hale, calm and composed, exuding the confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. His expensive suit was crisp, his smile unwavering. The mayor leaned back in his chair, his voice smooth and controlled as he addressed the court. "I have dedicated my life to serving this city with integrity. Any claim against me is simply a misunderstanding." His words were polished, but the room was tense. The people of Block 9 were not buying it. They had heard promises before. They had seen funds disappear. They had watched their community crumble while the wealthier parts of the city flourished. Then the bailiff called the next witness. "Andre Bell, please take the stand." A murmur rippled through the crowd. A child? Some scoffed. Others exchanged skeptical glances. What could a 12-year-old possibly contribute? Andre walked forward, his small frame dwarfed by the massive courtroom. He adjusted the tie his grandmother had made him wear. His palms were sweaty, but his jaw was set with determination. The prosecutor approached the bench. "Andre, do you know why you are here today?" Andre cleared his throat and nodded. "Yes, sir." The mayor smirked, watching with amusement. This was a game to him, but Andre was not here to play. The prosecutor nodded. "Then please, tell the court what you know." Andre inhaled sharply. Then he pointed his small finger straight at the mayor. "Mr. Mayor, you are the one who stole from us. You let my neighborhood rot while you watered grass by your mansion. You took our hope and burned it for luxury." A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. Mayor Hale's face lost its color. His fingers gripped the edge of the table. The mayor scoffed, shaking his head. "That is ridiculous. He is just a kid." Andre's voice rose. "I am a kid who knows the truth. You said there was not enough money to fix the Block 9 community center, but you had enough money to build a golf course by your house." The courtroom rumbled with whispers. Reporters frantically typed on their phones. Cameras zoomed in. The judge banged his gavel. "Order in the court." But Andre was not done. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, the leaked email that had been circulating online. He held it high. "I printed it. I read it. I understand it. You signed it." Gasps echoed. People turned to the mayor, whose hands were now balled into fists. His once confident smirk had vanished. The prosecutor took the paper from Andre and presented it to the judge. "Your Honor, this document proves Mayor Hale knowingly redirected funds meant for the community into private developments. This is fraud. This is corruption. And this is the testimony of a young man who had the courage to say what so many have been afraid to." The courtroom was dead silent. Then, an eruption. The gallery exploded into murmurs, gasps, and camera flashes. Some people clapped. Others yelled. The mayor's lawyers scrambled. Mayor Hale opened his mouth to protest, but the judge silenced him with a look. "This hearing is now in recess. We will reconvene after a formal review of this new evidence." Andre exhaled. His hands were shaking, but his heart was steady. The courtroom had just witnessed something historic. Comment, "Let that boy speak," if you felt the weight of those words. Within hours, Andre's testimony was on every major news channel. Clips of him standing in court, pointing at the mayor, and declaring the truth played on repeat. News anchors analyzed every word. Legal experts debated the case, and citizens of the city were left in shock. The hearing, which was expected to be nothing more than routine, had transformed into a scandal of historic proportions. Online, hashtags like #Block9Truth and number sign Andre versus Mayor began trending. People from all over the country shared their thoughts. Some called Andre a hero, a brave young man who had the courage to stand against corruption. Others demanded immediate action, calling for a deeper investigation into city finances. The mayor's office scrambled. Press releases were issued, filled with carefully worded denials and attempts to downplay the situation. A spokesperson from the mayor's office made a public statement. The young man was clearly emotional. He does not fully understand the complexities of city budgeting. We remain confident that the facts will show Mayor Hale acted appropriately. But the people of Block 9 knew better. Community groups, activists, and even local businesses started digging. They uncovered more emails, messages between city officials discussing the budget redirections in secret. One leaked memo even admitted that public backlash was expected, but that it would die down quickly. The city council, now under extreme pressure, launched an emergency ethics hearing. At first, the mayor doubled down. He insisted that Andre was confused, that the young boy had misinterpreted what he read. He claimed that his decisions were in the best interest of the entire city, not just one neighborhood. But it was too late. The floodgates had opened. Residents of Block 9 filled the streets, holding signs, chanting Andre's name and demanding accountability. News helicopters captured aerial shots of the protests, showing the overwhelming number of people standing together for justice. Andre's grandmother, still in the hospital recovering from her illness, was interviewed by a local reporter. Lying in her bed, weak but determined, she managed a proud smile. "That's my boy," she said. "Told y'all not to underestimate him." The clip of her words went viral. It was replayed on television, quoted in newspaper headlines, and shared across social media. Andre, meanwhile, was still processing everything. He never intended to become the face of a movement. He just wanted to tell the truth. But now, people were looking to him for more. His words had ignited something much bigger than he had ever imagined. The mayor, once so confident and untouchable, now faced the weight of public scrutiny. The Ethics Committee subpoenaed records, called in more witnesses, and examined the financial transactions in question. For the first time in years, the people of Block 9 felt hope. The story had grown beyond one boy's testimony. It was now a fight for justice, for truth, and for every neglected neighborhood that had ever been ignored by those in power. Andre's small voice had become the loudest sound in the city. Like if you believe the smallest voices often tell the biggest truths. Mayor Hale's empire crumbled in just 48 hours. The verdict was damning: ethics violations, fund misappropriation, and perjury. The man who once held the city in his grip now stood disgraced, stripped of power, and forced to resign under mounting pressure. The governor wasted no time, declaring a special election to restore leadership. But for the people of Block 9, this was not just about a new mayor. They wanted justice. The stolen funds had left their neighborhood in ruin: underfunded schools, crumbling infrastructure, and empty promises from politicians who saw them as little more than a statistic. They demanded full restoration, not just an apology. And at the heart of it all was Andre, the 12-year-old who had stood up when no one else would. The citywide press conference was packed. Journalists, community leaders, and residents filled every available space. The tension was electric, a mixture of anger, hope, and the undeniable truth that the city's children had paid the price for corruption. Andre stood at the podium, his small hands gripping the edges, his expression steady. He took a deep breath, exhaling slowly before leaning into the microphone. The room fell into absolute silence. "I wasn't brave," he said, his voice clear and unwavering. "I was just tired of pretending grown-ups always do the right thing." For a moment, the words hung in the air. A stark and brutal truth spoken by a child who had carried more weight than any adult in that room. Then the crowd erupted. Applause, cheers, and a swell of emotion swept through the press conference hall. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment that would define not just Andre's fight, but an entire movement. The microphone squealed as a reporter leaned forward. "Andre, what do you hope happens next?" Andre glanced at his mother, then at the residents of Block 9 who had stood by him through it all. "I hope they put the money back where it belongs. I hope no kid has to sit in a school without books, or drinks from a water fountain that smells like rust. And I hope we stop acting like kids can't see when things are wrong." The mayor's absence left a void, but it also left a choice. The city could sweep this moment under the rug like so many before it, or it could be the spark of something greater. The people in that room, the people watching from their homes, knew what they had to do. Outside, signs filled the streets. "Justice for Block 9. No more corruption. We stand with Andre." The movement was no longer just about one neighborhood. It was about an entire city waking up. A journalist spoke into the camera, her voice barely cutting through the roar of the crowd. "This is not just about politics. This is about accountability, about communities refusing to be ignored any longer." And at the center of it all stood Andre, a boy who had carried the weight of justice on his young shoulders. He did not smile in victory. He did not gloat. He simply stood there, knowing the fight was not over, but also knowing he had taken the first step when no one else would. Now, it was the city's turn. Type "Justice for Block 9" if you believe Andre carried more weight than any adult in that room. The winds of change swept through Block 9, carrying with them the promise of a new beginning. The special election ushered in a new mayor, one who vowed to reinvest in underserved communities. Words became action as the city turned its focus toward healing and rebuilding. The first project was the heart of Block 9, the community center. Once a symbol of neglect and corruption, it was now reborn. The city rebuilt it from the ground up, a state-of-the-art facility dedicated to education, mentorship, and civic engagement. At the grand opening, a gleaming plaque was unveiled above the entrance, the Bell Center for Justice, a tribute not only to those who had fought for change, but to the belief that justice begins at the community level. Andre stood among the gathered crowd, his presence quiet but undeniable. The boy who had sparked a movement now watched as his neighborhood flourished. He had never wanted fame, nor did he see himself as anything more than a kid who refused to stay silent. Yet, the impact of his courage was undeniable. A journalist stepped forward, microphone in hand. "Andre, you stood against corruption when no one else would. How does it feel to see all of this come to life?" Andre glanced at the newly built center, then at the families who would finally have a safe space to gather and grow. "I'm not a hero," he said simply. "I'm just a kid with good teachers." The mayor, standing nearby, nodded in agreement. "And we are all better for listening to him." The changes did not stop with Block 9. Andre's fight had ignited a citywide initiative to ensure funds were protected, schools were properly supported, and youth voices were included in policy discussions. More than that, it inspired a movement, one that extended beyond city limits. Andre's efforts earned him a full academic scholarship, an opportunity that ensured his future would be as bright as the one he helped create for others. But he did not stop there. As a newly appointed youth ambassador for civic education, he traveled to schools, speaking with students about their power to hold leaders accountable. He taught them what he had learned the hard way, that justice is not a privilege. It is a right that must be defended. One evening, as the sun cast golden hues over the city, Andre walked past the Bell Center for Justice. Inside, children laughed, students studied, and a mural depicting the strength of the community stretched across the far wall. It was no longer just a building. It was a promise fulfilled. A passerby stopped him, a father holding his young daughter's hand. "My son used to play basketball at the old center before it fell apart," the man said. "Now, thanks to you, my daughter will have a place to learn and grow." "Thank you, Andre." Andre smiled, shaking his head. "Don't thank me. Just promise to keep fighting for what is right." The man nodded, his grip on his daughter's hand tightening. Always. As the city lights flickered on, illuminating a future shaped by accountability and hope, Andre knew his work was far from over, but for now, he allowed himself a moment to take it all in. A new beginning for Block 9 had arrived. Drop a, "If you think every city should have kids like Andre holding adults accountable." A month had passed since the scandal shook the city, and Andre's name had traveled far beyond Block 9. His words had sparked not just change, but a movement. Now, he stood at the state capitol, invited to speak before lawmakers, educators, and leaders who had seen what a single voice could do. The chamber was packed, every seat filled. Rows of politicians sat at attention, some shifting in their chairs, some leaning forward, eyes fixed on the young boy standing behind the grand wooden podium. The weight of history pressed down on the room, but Andre carried it with the same quiet determination that had made the city listen. He adjusted the microphone. The murmur of the crowd faded into silence. He took a deep breath, then spoke. "I know what you all want to say," he began. "You want to tell me I'm brave. You want to tell me I'm special." He paused, scanning the faces before him. "But I'm not." A ripple of surprise moved through the audience. He continued, "I was just a kid who saw something wrong and spoke up. That should not be brave. That should be normal." A hush settled over the room, the weight of his words sinking in. Andre's gaze swept across the chamber, finding the teachers who had encouraged him, the community leaders who had stood by him, and the reporters who had followed his journey from the beginning. "Don't clap for me," he said. "Clap for the next kid who's watching and wondering if they should speak up." He let the words linger before driving his final point home. "Yes, you should." The room erupted. The applause was thunderous, echoing off the high ceilings. Some lawmakers stood immediately, others followed, until the entire chamber was on its feet. Teachers wiped tears from their eyes. Even the most hardened politicians seemed visibly moved. Andre stepped back from the podium, allowing the moment to live on its own. He had said what needed to be said, and now it was up to them to carry it forward. Later, as he walked through the grand hallways of the Capitol, a young girl approached him, no older than 10. She clutched a notebook to her chest, her eyes wide with something between awe and determination. "Mr. Andre?" she asked hesitantly. "How do you know when it's time to speak up?" Andre crouched down to meet her gaze. "If you see something that makes your heart hurt," he said, "then it's time." She nodded solemnly, as if taking an unspoken vow. Andre watched as she disappeared into the crowd, knowing she would not be the last. His speech would be replayed on television, printed in newspapers, and quoted in classrooms. But none of that mattered as much as the simple truth that had carried him through this journey. One voice, when used with courage, could change everything. Comment: Andre is a giant, if this young man's courage left you speechless. Andre Bell reminded an entire city that truth does not care about age, status, or fear. It only needs a voice willing to rise above silence. His journey, from a boy who dared to question authority to a symbol of justice, proved that courage does not come from power, but from conviction. Block 9 would never be the same. The stolen funds had been restored. The Bell Center for Justice stood as a beacon for the community, and accountability had taken root in a system that once thrived on neglect. But more than policies and buildings, it was the people who had changed. Parents listened more. Teachers encouraged harder. Kids, watching Andre stand before lawmakers and demand better, realized they, too, had a voice. The echoes of his fight traveled beyond city limits. Schools across the country discussed his story. Activists cited his words. Civic leaders invited young voices into conversations where they had long been absent. One moment, one boy, a ripple that refused to fade. Andre never sought recognition. When asked about his role in everything that happened, he would simply shake his head and say, "I just told the truth." The rest was up to everyone else, and that was the power of it all. His belief that the responsibility did not end with him. His speech at the state capitol was replayed in classrooms and homes, reminding people everywhere that silence enables injustice, but a single voice can shake even the most powerful foundations. Change did not stop with Andre, nor should it. His story was not just about him, it was about every child, every community, and every moment when someone faces the choice to speak or stay silent. One voice, one moment, one city, forever changed. Watch our next story. Black girl walks into court. What she says about her stepfather leaves the judge frozen. Subscribe and turn on that bell to follow real stories of truth, transformation, and bravery. Share this now. Someone out there is one voice away from speaking up. What happens when a child, alone in the face of the law, decides to speak the truth? In a world where inequality runs deep, a young boy walks into a courtroom, and his words will change everything. What would you say if the one person you trusted the most was taken from you and your world fell apart? In the cold, sterile atmosphere of the courtroom, a young black boy stands alone, trembling slightly under the weight of the moment. He is only 4 years old, but in this room he feels the full force of the world's injustices. His white button-up shirt and beige pants, meticulously chosen by his mother, show that this is no ordinary day. He isn't here to play, and he isn't here to be a child. He's here to fight for his family, to fight for his father, who is sitting behind bars for a crime he did not commit. The boy's large brown eyes scan the room, taking in the formalities of the setting, the serious faces of the adults around him, and the towering female judge who sits at the front. He doesn't fully understand what's going on, but he knows enough to understand that his father, the man he loves with all his heart, is in trouble. His father's life is on the line, and the weight of that knowledge hangs heavy on his tiny shoulders. The room seems too big for him, the voices too loud, but somehow he finds the courage to stand tall and look at the judge, knowing he has to speak. The case is one of many that reflects the deep flaws in the justice system, a system that often turns a blind eye to the poor and disadvantaged, where wealth and status are the only currencies that truly matter. The boy's father, a hard-working, humble man, has been accused of a crime he couldn't possibly have committed. He has no money to afford a lawyer, no resources to fight back, and no hope that anyone in the system will believe him. His only hope is his son, the boy who's about to speak up, the boy who has witnessed the truth. The prosecution has painted a grim picture of the father, a desperate man who committed the crime out of necessity. The defense, however, is too overwhelmed to do anything more than offer the most basic argument of innocence. In the face of such a powerful system, where wealth and connections rule the day, the truth seems irrelevant. The boy's family lives in a neighborhood that is constantly overlooked, and no one from the outside is willing to listen to their story. The boy's father stands accused, and the weight of that accusation seems insurmountable. But this child, standing before the judge, is about to show the world what it means to stand up for the people you love, regardless of the odds. As the boy is called to the stand, he shuffles forward, his small feet hesitating on the cold floor. His hand grips the edge of the podium, but his voice is unwavering. The judge, who has seen countless children testify before her, raises an eyebrow. How could this young child, so small, so fragile, speak to the truth of what happened? But there is something about the way he looks at her, the sincerity in his eyes, that makes her pause. His words come slowly at first, his voice barely more than a whisper. But each word carries the weight of his love for his father, his sense of justice, and his unshakable belief that the truth will come out. "Please, ma'am," the boy says, looking up at the judge with big, earnest eyes. "My daddy didn't do it. He didn't hurt anyone. He was just trying to help. He's good. He's not a bad man." The judge, taken aback, feels a pang of emotion she wasn't expecting. How many times had she heard a child's words only for them to be dismissed as innocent naivete? How many times had she listened to the systems that brought people to court, the systems that cared only about evidence and not about people? Yet something in this child's plea makes her wonder if there is more to this story than what is being presented. The boy continues, now a little braver, his small voice carrying the conviction of someone who has witnessed injustice firsthand. "My daddy, he works hard. He works every day. He didn't hurt anyone, and I know he didn't do nothing wrong. He's good. He's my daddy. He wouldn't hurt anyone, ma'am." The courtroom is silent. The words hang in the air, piercing the tension like a beam of light breaking through a stormy sky. There is no denying the truth in this child's voice, the purity of his words. It's clear now that this is not a child who has been coached, not a child reciting something learned by rote. This is a boy whose heart has been broken by the accusations against his father, and whose love for him is so deep that he is willing to stand up to an entire system to protect him. The judge shifts uncomfortably in her seat. She had seen countless cases, heard countless testimonies, but something about this child's courage, about the innocence in his eyes, makes her question everything she thought she knew about justice. How could she dismiss his words? How could anyone in this room continue to pretend that wealth and status were more important than truth? The boy's words don't just challenge the court. They challenge the very foundations of a system that often sees people like his father as disposable. In his innocence, the boy has opened a door to a truth that cannot be ignored. The system is broken, and it is the voices of the vulnerable, the voices of those who are too often overlooked, that can expose the deepest flaws of all. As the boy finishes speaking, his eyes never leave the judge's face. There is no fear in him now, only a quiet determination. His heart may be heavy with the knowledge that his father's fate is still uncertain, but in that moment he has done what he needed to do. He has told the truth. And in doing so, he has given everyone in that room the chance to finally see it. The judge looks around the courtroom, her eyes meeting those of the attorneys, the prosecutors, and the defense. The weight of the boy's words settles over the room, and for the first time, it seems that justice might finally have a chance to prevail. The boy's life, though short, has been shaped by struggle. Growing up in a neighborhood where crime lurks on every corner and poverty is the only constant, he has learned that survival is not just about food, shelter, and safety, but about resilience. His family doesn't have much, but they have each other, and for him, that's been enough. His father, a man of quiet strength, is his world. The boy looks up to him in a way that only a child could, a hero who makes everything better with just a smile or a reassuring word. His father works long hours, laboring in a job that demands everything from him yet gives little in return. Despite the grueling hours and the physical toll, he never complains. The boy's father carries the weight of his family's well-being on his shoulders, but he does it with pride and without hesitation. The boy's life, as hard as it may have been at times, is filled with love, laughter, and warmth. His father's love is the anchor that keeps him steady in a world that often seems indifferent to their struggles. But the world has a way of taking from people like them, and that's exactly what happens when the boy's father is wrongfully accused of a crime he didn't commit. The accusation comes without warning, a charge based on nothing but suspicion and prejudice. His father, who has worked tirelessly to build an honest life, finds himself thrown into a nightmare he couldn't have prepared for. In an instant, the family's world crumbles. The boy's father, a man who has always tried to do right, is now forced to prove his innocence in a system that is built to favor the wealthy and powerful. His father's arrest is not just the loss of freedom, it's the destruction of everything they've worked for, the breaking of their family's fragile stability. The injustice the boy witnesses is stark and unforgiving. He sees his father mistreated by the police, humiliated in front of the very people he spent his life trying to protect. The boy has heard the whispers from the neighbors, seen the way people look at them differently now, as though they are guilty just because they don't have money or influence. The justice system, it seems, is a machine that's rigged against people like them. His father, with no lawyer to defend him, faces a system stacked with prejudice. And the boy, who doesn't yet fully understand the complexity of the world, feels the sting of that unfairness in his bones. Yet, despite the overwhelming weight of injustice that presses down on their family, the boy's father remains resolute. In the face of it all, he refuses to let the system break him. He teaches his son, in small ways, the importance of doing what's right, of holding on to hope, even when it feels impossible. The boy watches his father, broken yet unbowed, and learns the most important lesson of all. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to stand up in the face of it. His father's calm demeanor in the face of such overwhelming odds serves as a reminder that no matter how hard life gets, the fight for what's right is always worth it. For the boy, his father's struggle becomes his own. As he watches his father face the legal system with dignity, even when it seems to have already passed judgment on him, the boy grows increasingly aware of the injustices around him. He learns that in a world where truth can be distorted and the powerful often walk away unscathed, the only weapon he has is the truth. No matter how small he is, no matter how much the system wants to ignore his voice. In this time of great uncertainty, the boy understands that he cannot fix the system on his own, but he also realizes that he must stand up for his father. He has seen his father endure so much already, but it is now up to him to do whatever he can to help. The boy's belief in justice is firm, and as the case moves forward, he feels a growing determination to ensure his father's voice is heard. In a world where power, money, and influence seem to reign, the boy understands the harsh reality. The poor don't stand a chance unless they speak up, unless they fight back. Though the boy doesn't fully understand the ins and outs of the court system, he knows this much. His father is innocent, and that's enough. He knows that even if it feels like the world is against them, he cannot let injustice stand. He must be brave, just as his father has always been. It is this understanding, this quiet strength, that drives him to step into the courtroom, to speak out, to change everything. His love for his father is his motivation, and his belief in justice is what will carry him through. As he stands in front of the judge, dressed in his white button-up shirt and beige pants, the boy's fear is palpable, but so is his determination. He has seen the strength in his father, and now it is his turn to show the world that truth, courage, and love can stand tall against the weight of a broken system. The boy, though small in stature, holds the weight of his family's future on his tiny shoulders. But he is not afraid. He will speak, and the truth will be heard. No matter how hard the world tries to silence him, he knows that his father is innocent, and he will do everything in his power to prove it. The courtroom was a place of sterile formality, the kind of place where rules and procedures ruled over every action, every word. But as the small boy entered, the atmosphere seemed to shift, almost imperceptibly at first, as though the walls themselves were unsure of what would happen next. He was only a child, no older than 6, but his presence seemed to occupy the entire room. Dressed in a white button-up shirt and beige pants, he looked far more serious than anyone might have expected. His hands were small and trembling, his little face drawn with a mix of fear and determination. Yet in his eyes there was something else, a quiet fire, a fierce love for the man who had always been there for him. His father, the man who had raised him with nothing but hope, was now facing the unthinkable. The boy's father, a man who had worked tirelessly and honestly all his life, was accused of something he didn't do. But the boy knew the truth, and today, despite being only a child, he was about to make that truth known to everyone. As he walked down the aisle of the courtroom, the murmurs of the adults in the room quieted. The boy's small, unsteady steps echoed in the space, and all eyes followed him. Lawyers, witnesses, and even the judge, a woman of sharp mind and stoic demeanor, watched him closely. They had expected a grown man to speak, to stand up for the accused, but no one had anticipated this. The boy, standing alone, seemed so out of place. Yet in that moment, he also seemed to belong in this space more than anyone else. His words, though simple and raw, had the power to shift the scales of justice itself. But no one yet understood that. He reached the witness stand and climbed up with some difficulty, his small legs barely reaching the edge of the seat. His eyes remained fixed on his father, sitting in the defendant's chair, looking tired but unbroken. The boy's heart ached as he looked at him. His father had been through so much already, and now this. The weight of the world seemed to hang over them both, but the boy's gaze was steady, as though his mind had already made up its own decision. He would not let his father down. The room fell into an unnatural silence, as the boy, standing small before the judge, looked up at her. Her face was one of professionalism and authority. But the boy wasn't intimidated. He had seen authority in his life before, and he had learned to look it in the eye. But now, with everything at stake, it felt like the boy was the one who held the power. He swallowed hard, his throat tight, but he had a question to ask, one that had been burning in his mind ever since his father's arrest. If my dad was rich, would he still be in trouble? The boy's voice trembled, but it carried an innocence so pure that it struck everyone in the room like a punch to the gut. The words fell into the silence like an accusation. They weren't just words. They were the question that cut through the layers of bureaucracy, the systems that had failed his father, and the prejudices that defined the world they lived in. His question wasn't a legal one. It was a human one, the question of fairness, of equality, of whether justice could truly be blind when the world was so clearly divided into the rich and the poor. The room was still. No one moved, no one spoke. It was as if the boy had broken the unspoken rule that children were to be seen but not heard, especially in such a serious place. The judge, usually composed and unflappable, blinked several times, clearly thrown off by the raw honesty of the boy's words. The attorneys, who had spent hours, days even, crafting their legal arguments, suddenly found themselves at a loss for words. The spectators, some of whom had been shaking their heads in disbelief at the case against the boy's father, now sat in stunned silence. The boy's question hung in the air, unanswered and unresolved. The judge looked down at him, her lips pressed tightly together, trying to maintain control of the proceedings. The words were simple, childlike even, yet they had the power to challenge everything the court had been built on. The boy wasn't asking for an explanation of the law. He was asking for a reckoning. He was asking why things had to be this way, why his father had to suffer when it seemed like others never did, simply because of how much money they had. The silence stretched, uncomfortable and thick, as the boy stood, waiting. His small hands gripped the edge of the stand, his body stiff but resolute. His eyes never left the judge's face, as though he knew, deep down, that his question was the beginning of something much bigger than this courtroom. He didn't need to understand all the details of the law. He only needed to know that his father was good, that he didn't deserve to be here. And now he had spoken out, using the only weapon he had, his voice. The tension in the room was palpable. It wasn't just the boy who was on trial. It was everything that had brought him here. The systems of power, the prejudice, the assumptions about people who didn't have wealth were all being questioned in that moment. The boy's courage had done something that no lawyer could have managed. It had brought the human element to the forefront of the case. In a world where so many were willing to look the other way, the boy was forcing them to face the truth. The judge cleared her throat, her stern face betraying the faintest glimmer of emotion. It was clear she hadn't expected this, but as she sat there, processing the boy's words, she knew this moment would change everything. The boy had asked a question that no one had dared ask before. No one had dared to confront the ugly truths lurking in the shadows of the case. The female judge sat back in her chair, her eyes momentarily closed, as if processing the weight of the boy's question. The room was still, the silence heavier now, laden with the weight of a truth that no one wanted to face. The boy's small form, standing bravely before her, seemed to magnify the injustice in the room. His words, though innocent and simple, had cut through the formalities of law and hit right at the heart of a much larger issue, the deep-rooted inequality that plagued the system itself. She had dealt with countless cases in her career, but this one felt different. This was no longer just a case about a crime. It was a case about the unfairness of the world, the disparity between the haves and the have-nots, and the systemic bias that influenced every decision, whether conscious or unconscious. The boy, no older than 6, stood quietly, waiting for a response. His innocent face, though filled with fear, was unyielding in its determination. His question had shaken the room, but it was clear that it had also forced people to confront something they'd preferred to ignore. The judge finally spoke, her voice soft but sincere, the weight of her words carrying a depth of understanding. "Your words are very wise for someone so young," she said, her gaze not leaving the boy. Her eyes flickered momentarily toward his father, who sat in the defendant's chair, his face a mixture of hope and anguish. The boy had spoken not just for his father, but for every person who had ever been wronged by a system that valued wealth over truth. She took another slow breath, her voice now more deliberate. "But your question is one I must think on carefully." The boy nodded, his eyes still locked on her, as if waiting for her to give him the answer he knew was true. "If my dad was rich," he repeated, "would he still be in trouble?" It wasn't just a question. It was an accusation wrapped in innocence. He wasn't speaking from a place of malice, but from the painful clarity of a child who had seen the world in its rawest form. To him, it was simple. His father was a good man, hard-working, honest, and loving. Yet because of the circumstances beyond their control, circumstances rooted in poverty, he was facing charges that seemed entirely unjust. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence was thick and oppressive, and the weight of the boy's words seemed to press down on everyone in the room. The prosecutor, who had been vehement in his case against the boy's father, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He was a man used to dealing with legal facts, not raw emotional pleas, and the boy's question had forced him to pause, to reconsider the larger implications of his role in this trial. Was he really fighting for justice, or was he simply upholding a system that protected the interests of the powerful? The attorney representing the boy's father, a man who had been trying to defend him in the face of mounting evidence, found himself at a loss for words. The question had changed the nature of the entire case. It wasn't about guilt or innocence anymore. It was about the fairness of the system that had led to this moment. The judge's face softened as she